Meanwhile, the Food and Drug Administration in the US has now rejected a proposal to give an additional Pfizer booster shot to the general public. Initially, that agency had said a booster shot could be of some benefit to people over the age of 65. We're joined now by the Vice Chair at the SA Medical Association, Dr. Mvuyisi Mzukwa. Dr. Mzukwa, good evening to you, and thank you for your time. Why would we suddenly need, or would people suddenly need, a third shot? If people have had two, we understood that gave them a certain amount of immunity, it gave them certain protection. At what point would a scientist say, actually, we need to consider a third shot?
Good evening, Steve, and good evening to your viewers. The question that you're raising now, I think it's what is part of the scientific discourse. You will remember that there's a case in Israel where I think by the end of March, they had about half of the population already been vaccinated. And thereafter, they were hit by the Delta variant. And, at that time, some of the people were about 5 months vaccinated. And you can imagine that there was evidence that, cases were starting to rise, amongst the vaccinated ones. And that caused pressure on the system. And that's why the authorities were prompted to think about or even consider a third booster and go for it. Now, the reason is obvious is that if you have introduction of new variants, they may disturb, the program. We know that the issue of a booster dose is not a new phenomenon. You'll recall if healthcare workers in the hospitals, wherever they are, they get a booster shot of a hepatitis B vaccine. So it's not a new phenomenon because at the end of the day, the vaccine-initiated immunity tends to go down over time.
Is the problem here that normally, and you talk about time, vaccines are often tested over a long period of time? In this case, there was such an urgent need to get as many vaccines as possible. Did that mean that they just weren't tested for long enough and we don't actually know how long they last? Is that the problem?
There were estimations. There's no certainty. There's no certainty that they last for such a long time. But people have been making estimates that takes about 8 to 9 months, J&J, and stuff like that. So there's no definite certainty on these issues.
We're used to, the idea of having a vaccine as a child and maybe having it once, and then maybe for a flu vaccine when we get older, one or two things. You talk about health workers and hepatitis B. Is there something specific about the coronavirus that means that we might need booster shots that you don't need when you vaccinate against other diseases?
Remember, the coronavirus is an mRNA virus, like your HIV. So it's a very unpredictable virus that tends to, especially with the issue of variants coming from different countries and stuff like that. So that is why even now we do not have a vaccine when it comes to HIV, because these type of viruses are not easy to develop vaccines against. So that is why we're still going to continue struggling with COVID-19 in terms of attending to the variants that come up and also having to get booster shots.
And a booster shot, is it exactly the same as the first vaccine, or would it be something different? Would you have to make sure you got exactly the right injection?
It is the same vaccine. It's a person who's already been vaccinated fully. If it's a Pfizer, this person has already got 2 shots. But then after a time, then government would consider. But you can imagine that, in our country, it would be difficult for now to consider the issue of a third dose or a booster dose. Because, we've got rural areas, people who have not been vaccinated as yet. It would be, to a certain extent, unethical to really run for that, unless you are going to target certain communities like the healthcare workers and those who are having a higher risk for COVID-19. But to just think about it, it's going to be a challenge in our context.
Dr. Mvuyisi Mzukwa, Vice Chair of the SA Medical Association, thank you very much indeed.